Welcome to V Lecture Series 13.2 Philosophical Questions. It's Palmderos coming to you today from Salve Regina University campus in Newport, Rhode Island. Introduction. Questions may be the starting point for all human activities, the forming of relationships, learning how to do something. Probably all forms of learning begin with some kind of question. That's true of philosophy. Philosophy traditionally begins with the formulation of philosophical questions. For example, the dialogues of Plato all begin with some key question that the conversation pursues. For beginners, a significant problem is being able to identify a good philosophical question and also formulating good philosophical questions. That's the objective of this V-Lecture series, to sketch a approach or a few approaches to identifying and formulating philosophical questions. Let's first review some uh, historical and celebrated examples of philosophical questions. We have to turn to Plato to begin. Plato's Republic, for example, the book-length conversation about justice uh, begins with a philosophical question. Initially, the question is first a informal question among uh, people speaking, including Socrates. Socrates asks, "What is your report on old age? Would you call it a difficult time of life?" asks Socrates. Soon enough, this ordinary question is reformulated as a philosophical topic. Socrates, well, not Socrates, but one of his friends asks, "Justice by itself, how does it help? And how does injustice harm the person who possesses it?" With this question, they proceed on a lengthy conversation about the just person and the just society. In the medieval university, the disputations featured questions. This is true of the collection of disputations titled Summa Theologicae by St. Thomas Aquinas. This multi-thousand page book is uh, replete with theological and philosophical questions. I'll mention at least three. Um, in the second part of the Summa Theologicae, question 1, article 1, is there an ultimate end for human life? Similarly, question 1, article 6, this is one of my favorites. Does man will all that he wills for an ultimate end? And then on the same topic, question 5, article 3, can one be happy in this life? In the 20th century, the philosopher Martin Heidegger made questions an important theme in his famous work, Being and Time. Let's hear Martin Heidegger writing about questions and the main question of his book. Questioning can come about as just asking around, or as an explicitly formulated question. In this book, the question to be formulated is the meaning of being. As a seeking, questioning needs prior guidance from what it seeks. The meaning of being must therefore already be available to us in a certain way. First attempt at identifying and formulating philosophical questions. We could form a definition of a philosophical question. The last series, 13.1, sketched out the most popular and established approach to formulating questions. I'm going to follow that process. It was made famous by Plato and by Aristotle, the genus differentiae approach. First, we ask, what is the genus of a philosophical question? Well, clearly it's a type of question, but if question is used in our definition, we would create a circular definition. So we have to find a better term for the genus. Um, Martin Heidegger proposed a seeking. Every question, any kind of question, is a kind of seeking. Um, I propose that any question, including philosophical questions, are an expression, some kind of expression. It's very helpful in formulating a definition to think about some of the examples of the thing that you're going to define. So, just thinking on the topic of questions as a form of expression, there are in fact many different types of questions. There are factual questions, where we ask, uh, you know, where is something or what is something? Uh, and these factual questions can become complex and ask about, for example, the explanation for something, why it's there. Um, that becomes a scientific question. So scientific questions are plausibly a more sophisticated kind of factual question. And then there are a whole bunch of practical type questions that we ask all the time. How do I get to somewhere, or how do I do something? So clearly, philosophical questions are different from these other kinds of questions, all of which are expressions. According to our method in 13.1, to truly define something, we need to identify the differentiae which distinguish that thing from the other things that belong to the genus. Well, what distinguishes a philosophical question? Well, certainly it must involve some uncertainty. Something is unknown and we want to know about it. So uncertainty distinguishes a philosophical question. That's also true of practical questions and factual questions. So there must be more differentiae, or one more differentia. Well, I propose a basic assumption. An uncertainty about a basic assumption is what distinguishes philosophical questions from factual questions or from practical questions. A basic assumption is something that we need to believe or assume in order to think or act in any way. And usually basic assumptions are familiar to us, and yet our knowledge is vague or incomplete. So, to conclude, a philosophical question is an expression of uncertainty about a basic assumption. I've been impressed by a book by two contemporary philosophers, Anthony Weston, who I was a colleague of when I first began teaching, and his colleague Stephen Bloch Schulman. They wrote a book called Thinking About Questions, and according to them, this is their definition of a question in general. A question is a request to attend to a curiosity, uncertainty, or doubt, and implies the desire for a response. They go on to distinguish five kinds of philosophical questions, among which is what I've proposed, that philosophical questions are about basic assumptions. Let's now make a second attempt at philosophical questions. In this case, let us sketch out an approach to formulating a philosophical question. Step one. Well, to formulate a philosophical question, first thing to do would be to identify a area of basic assumption of interest to you. So this may be a basic assumption that's been brought to your attention. Perhaps you've heard of it as controversial and unknown. My favorite example, as when I began philosophy, was the topic of free will. All of us assume ourselves to have free will. The second step is to review the ingredients of this basic assumption. What are some of the insights that are common about this basic assumption? What are some scientific theories? Uh, what are some of the vocabulary words associated? So free will, for example, well, included in the idea of free will is the very idea of a will. Uh, so we would need to know what the will is to be able to talk about free will. Uh, In terms of scientific theories, there are several scientific theories that human behavior is not free, that human behavior is conditioned or coded in the DNA, or that human behavior is culturally shaped. So there's significant proposals that human nature, there is not a free will. Uh, we might notice that free will could be a universal fact of every human being, or perhaps free will is an attainment that comes with age. Raising this point has brought us now to the second step or the third step in formulating a philosophical question, uh, beginning now to generate some questions that will shed light into this basic assumption. So, one proposal: uh, is free will an attainment, or is it natural? Another philosophical question is, yes, what is the basis of a free will? Is it that we have an immortal soul? Is the free will based in this a thing we call the will, which we need to clarify? If it's true that human behavior is to some extent shaped or coded, um, can we reconcile that with the proposal that our will is free? So we've now come up with perhaps a lengthy list of questions. For any basic assumption, there are numerous questions that we might bring up. Step four, the last step, is to choose the question that is most promising to you. Choose the question that you feel ought to be answered, that seems most promising, and if possible, specify that question. It's true that with many philosophical questions, they're often first asked very broad or generally, and it's possible sometimes to specify a question and a much greater chance of arriving at some fruitful answer or conclusion. So in the case of free will, we might decide to specify, um, you know, mature adults as the subject of free will, or we might decide to specify certain areas of activity. Um, you know, is the human being free when he or she is thinking and speaking? We could specify what area of activity is of interest to us. To conclude, two proposals have come forth. One, we could define a philosophical question, and that will set us on our way to formulating philosophical questions. Two, we've sketched an approach to formulating philosophical questions. Let us now end with some examples, some further examples of going through the four-step process. Um, Time, I think of time as a important area of basic assumption. We all employ time in our day-to-day life. Rarely do we ask questions about the nature of time. Uh, let's now review some of the ingredients of our basic assumption about time. Well, time, above all, is a kind of measurement. Uh, Time seems to be independent of each of us individually. Uh, as we grow up, we begin to learn to keep track of time. We keep track of time with devices. So time devices seem to be an important part of the basic assumption about time. Time seems to vary as well. There's a subjective element to time. Time is at times slow, and at times time goes quickly. So perhaps now we're ready to formulate some first questions. Is time real and objective, or is time entirely a human construct? Seems a promising question. Are time devices needed in order to keep time? In fact, here perhaps is the promising question for me: must I keep time? Well, that seems to be a good question. It's a way, an ethical question, as well as a question about the nature of time. And I've specified the question a little bit. I've specified it to the individual, though we could ask that question also about society as a whole. Must our society or community keep time? Good life. Good life is an area of basic assumption. According to Philosophy 225 authors, all of us assume that there is a good life and our actions are generally aimed toward the good life. Um, According to Aristotle and Aquinas, most humans are vague about the good life. This would be an area of basic assumption. What are some of the ingredients? Well, according to popular language, uh, happiness is the term for good life. Many people think that you have to be a good person to have a good life. But even more common for many people, the good life means success and prosperity. Some pleasure must be involved. Uh, for many people, the good life requires effort and some kind of attainment. But on the other hand, perhaps it's that we need luck and beneficial circumstances for a good life. So those are some of the ingredients of this basic assumption. Can I now formulate some first questions? Um, is good life individual matter, or is good life generally shared? Are there diverse good lives, or is there one universal good life based in a human nature? Must I be a good person to have a good life? I think that's perhaps the most promising, interesting question. Not everybody will immediately say yes.